Hello, everyone, inside the chat on the convention. And if you're watching this afterwards from YouTube, this is an interview that I've been really, really excited to do because Justin Lee Anderson, who is with me right now, is not only one of my favorite authors, not only is he a great guy, but he's just excellent to talk to. So I've been looking forward to this a lot. How are you getting on today, Justin?
Oh, not bad, thanks, mate. How are you? And thank you for that lovely introduction.
It's so true as well. He didn't, and I refused the bribe that he gave me as well because it's from the heart, as you
I,
know.
I, I mean, the only bribe I could offer you would certainly be something non-cash. So, you know,
Well, there'll be pints probably at some point in the future.
definitely.
So thanks for coming along to talk to us at the our very very first Indie Fantasy convention that we run with the through the Indie Fantasy Addicts Facebook group, which you've been a member of for a very very
Yeah,
long time
yeah.
because a lot of people. Well, instead of me talking about it, I mean, why don't you briefly talk about your journey? Because now obviously you have the Iden saga with Orbit UK. It's Orbit US as well, isn't it? As well as,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And but you didn't start off with Orbit. You started off in a different place, and even with the books, the
Yeah,
series that you have out was different as well. So why don't you tell everyone about that?
yeah. So, I mean, I've told this story so many times and I still always think, where do I start? Um, so I started writing my first book, Carpe Diem, in my 20s, a long time ago. I vaguely remember them. And through various things. The short version of the story, I ended up going and working on some script writing stuff instead. And oh, I should probably point out, I did send the first 10,000 words to an agent who asked for the full, and I hadn't written any more. And that is the short version of my "Please don't ever do this" story. Uh, but because I was young and dumb and knew nothing about how you were supposed to submit to agents. So yeah, that was embarrassing. And then I went off on a sidetrack. I got into script writing instead, and doing other things. And then I finally came back to it, and I got an offer from another author who I knew online who was setting up her own publishing company. I didn't get it to a point where I was happy with it until after, unfortunately, that publishing company failed within the first year. She had made a deal with another company to pick up contracts of books that she had with her company. It was a really nice company. A couple of guys who run a company called Wild Wolf, based out of Newcastle. Um, they had a very small budget for anything other than basically publishing, um, but still, it did really well. That was back in 2015. We first published it. As I say, they had very little budget. It sold well. It sold a decent number of copies. Um, but in 2018, I was approached by a friend with the idea of he would put some money in and we would take the rights back and I would publish it myself. And because I had a background in all different kinds of publishings like magazines and guidebooks and things like that, I had a fair amount of knowledge to build on already. I'd learned because I was running Facebook ads myself over the previous few years. I'd learned how Facebook advertising worked, and I'd been able to make it work on as little as £1 a day. I was seeing results, and so we did that. I took it back, entered Carpet Diem, the new edition of Carpet Diem, into Spiffbo 4. Um, was bombed out in a pretty much the first round of cuts, I think, um, and thought, oh well, that's that. Um, the next year, 2019, published The Lost War, which was a complete divergence from Carpe Diem. Carpe Diem's a comedy fantasy in the vein of something like Tom Holt, whereas The Lost War is an epic mystery fantasy. But it was screaming at me to write it, despite my wife telling me I should write the sequel to the first one. So I wrote that, and that was the first thing we properly self-published. That was completely different from what I had done before, and thought, well, put this into Spiffbo as well, and put that into Spiffbo 6, and then won it, which was a huge surprise, considering my expectations were as low as if I don't go out in the first round of cuts, I've done better this time. Um, but that was amazing. So I won that. Mark Lawrence very kindly introduced me to his agent. As a result, his agent liked the book, who's now my agent, um, and we got a deal with Orbit for the whole series, which was now 4 books. It started out 3 books, and then book 2 got out of hand and became books 2 and 3.
Yes.
But Orbit knew that by the time we did the deal, so it wasn't like I had to get Orbit to take another book on, thankfully. Um, but yeah, and believe it or not, that's the short version of that story.
But I mean, I've heard it before, and but it's always amazing to hear, like, because obviously you hear about, and by the way, the a 3 book turned into a 4 book. We talked about in the last interview that we did today that the exact same thing happened to me. Happens to It's always that thing, isn't it? It's like I think it's one of those things where people try to trap themselves into a trilogy these days, where it's like it doesn't really want to be a trilogy, but it's expected to be a trilogy. But it's fascinating anyway to hear the story of, like, because you hear about indie writers that have these big successes, and they get traditionally published, or they do some kind of deal where it's like distribution deal, or something like that. And but I don't think anyone goes into something like Spiffbo thinking this is going to give me all these things that I'm looking for. I mean, your expectations were just basically just to do a little bit better than you did the last time.
Yeah, I hope just to be. I mean, I thought if I get as far as being a finalist, that's amazing because that's good publicity. It's a good network. It's a good community to be involved in. It gave me a chance to get to know a lot of the blogging community, a lot of the reviewers, and so I was just hoping to do better than the first time. Um, and what was interesting was very early on in the group that I was in, the original, like, first group sorted into, one of the other authors in that group um, said to me on, I think it must have been Discord, I think, said to me that I was going to win the whole thing. And I was like, Matt, she's like, no, look, I'm telling you, remember right now, I've told you this. And I was like, yeah, right. She was right. I don't know how she called that, having not read every other book in the competition, but she was just absolutely certain. She was like, no, that's the book that's the kind of book that's going to win. You'll win this year. And I was like,
Oh wow.
okay.
Was she giving out lottery numbers as well, or anything like that?
I,
Oh,
I wish I should have asked her. I
should have
absolutely
asked
should have
her.
asked her.
Yeah, definitely. And the whole thing with Spiffbo, because I mean, um, just to explain what Spiffbo is, it's the self-published
Self-published
fantasy.
fantasy blog off.
Yes. So it's like all the books. I think they take 300 books, isn't it? And they go to
Yep.
different bloggers, and they're all reviewed, and they go into different, like, yeah, they go through it.
Yeah, they get split up.
Um,
They get split up into 10 groups of 30 and distributed between 10 different blogs. And then each blog whittles down those groups to one finalist, and
yeah.
then all of the 10 blogs judge all of the 10 finalists, and the winner
Yes.
is the one with the best overall average score.
So it's like a really well varied pool of taste as well, isn't it? And obviously the books that go through, you can get. I mean, we in IFA, the Indie Fantasy Addicts, one of our admins, JD Evans, won it a couple of years ago as well with her book, which is more of a fantasy romance.
Uh-huh.
You've had, urban fantasy is doing quite well this year.
Yep.
You've had, obviously, it's very varied, isn't it, as to what strikes. So you can never really be so have someone say to you, "Oh, yours is going to win this year." It must be like it's very, very confident to be
Yeah, it
like,
was it
"Oh,
was really interesting because I mean the year, I can't remember if it was the year I got bombed out or if it was the next year, but like either that year or the following year, Orconomics won. And I had been
right,
thinking to myself, well, it's a comedy fantasy. Comedy's really subjective. You
yeah,
land on the right you land on the right person's pile, or you don't, and that's the way it goes. Um, so it wasn't the case of, like, comedy can't win. It's the wrong kind of book. It was like, no, because it just has to be the right book that lands with the right person. And even with The Lost War, I was lucky. I
yeah,
landed with Don Murray for my very first round. He picked me as a semi-finalist, um, and then Petros picked me as the finalist from Book Nest. And if I hadn't, maybe if I'd landed on another blog, I mean, there were plenty of other blogs that rated other finalists higher than they rated me. So it was very much an average across all of them. That was how I
mm,
came up top. But I mean, if I'd landed in one of the other groups, I might not even have been in the final.
yeah.
It's just it's luck, and I've had a big dash of luck in there.
Well, there's talent as well because the book's fantastic.
Oh, well,
there's
thank you.
no denying it. I mean, I read it when it was self-published, and I remember
Mhm.
meeting you at FantasyCon 2021 in the UK. Because for people listening, we are both in the UK and Ireland. There's a little bit of water that separates us, but we see each other quite often, a few
We're in the
times a
same
year.
time zone.
We're in the same time zone, yeah. And yeah, I remember meeting you at FantasyCon 2021, and you were reading, uh, and it was you hadn't sold the rights. I think you were kind of there was talk. I think at the time, 'cause I remember you saying to me a
I
few months
think it
later,
was.
saying something's happened. So
I think it was at that point. I think I remember if it's the same con I'm thinking of. I think the deal had been done, but it hadn't been announced, so I couldn't say anything. So I even
right,
had somebody come to me talking about, oh, could we do a thing? And I was just like, yes, but no, not the way you're thinking. But
yeah,
I can't. But like when this happens, I'll be able to talk more about it. And so yeah, I was having to be very I was having to be very kind of nudge and a wink.
yeah.
I have news,
So
but I can't tell you the news.
that's exactly what you
So
said. You were like,
it probably is.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Because yeah, cause I remember you going to your reading because I'd read it and I was like, I love this book, and I saw your name on the things. I was a little bit starstruck as well because I was like, God, this is such a great book, and like really intimidating and stuff. So it's like, oh, joking, he's not.
I was gonna say
He's not. But you are extremely tall. So I mean, I'm tall,
that
but
is true.
you're taller. So there is that.
That is true.
But like it's a fantastic book. With the whole kind of looking at it in terms of like your route through, I mean, obviously you tried Swiftbow twice with Carpet DM, which I put into the chat for people to check out if they want to read something that's self-published in comedy fantasy. I've also put the link in for Lost War as well. Um, but obviously you tried to do it twice, and so do you think that kind of exposure and that kind of experience of going through something like that is beneficial to indie writers and indie books just to kind of get that platform?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. It has so many advantages, and really that I can think of, no disadvantages. I mean, it's a great thing that Mark set up. I end up talking about this every time I talk about Swippo, but it's great that Mark took it on himself to kind of, you know, put a hand back down the ladder and help other people up as well, because he had no real, he doesn't need to.
Mm,
He's an extremely successful author in his own right. There's no reason for him to need to do this, but he wanted to help other, you know, budding, fledgling, aspiring fantasy authors up the ladder behind him. So, and yeah, I mean, it creates, there's a community there that's amazing. I've met a lot of friends in there that I get to see a couple of times a year at conventions and events. Um, it's a platform, it's profile, but more than anything else, it's kind of the community. It's the people that you meet and that you then form relationships with, and it helps you to. It's a support network, but it's also, everybody supports each other. So when you have a new book coming about, if you've got a new book coming out, you've got a network of people there who will shout about it and talk about it, and you do the same for them. And it's just
mm.
all, it's the whole rising tide lifts all boats. But it's true. It really is a great community. Um, and that is the biggest benefit of it, I think, is that your your career will benefit more probably from the connections you make than the direct exposure you get from being in the competition, I guess, is what I'm kind of saying.
Right, yeah, and because it's such a wealth of knowledge there as well, isn't it? Like, that
Yeah, absolutely.
you've got people that are just new to indie publishing that are like, I'm going to try this out, and you've got people that like, Rob J. Hayes or other people like that have been doing it for years that do Spiffbo every year and do all that kind of stuff, and they've been doing it in out. I mean, he was the first winner, I think he was, wasn't he? The first winner of Spiffbo, I think, going
I
back.
think Mike McClung was the first winner, if I
Yes,
remember
yeah,
rightly.
sorry, yeah,
But I
yeah.
think Rob might have won the second or third one.
Yeah, so you've got all of that kind of experience that you can tap into and help you along on your journey, which is you don't it the knowledge that you can get from people that are freely given it is invaluable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, just it's it's a very solitary profession to pursue, and um, the best way to learn some things is to speak to people who've been through it. But it's a great support network. There's nobody else who knows what it's like trying to write a book and market a book and run an entire business on the back of getting your book out there than somebody else who's doing it. And there's nobody else you can really talk to about it and sympathize with or have sympathize with you than somebody who knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, someone who's been in the trenches trying to do it.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. Exactly.
Speaking of, no one really kind of knows what it's like apart from someone who's done it. So we hear quite a lot about hybrid publishing these days,
Mm-hmm.
which is, for people listening in the chat or on YouTube, which is people that kind of, self-publish, that might be traditionally published as well, or might be with a small publisher. They're looking at different aspects of publishing and making that work for them. You're one of the people that have done it, and it's been a success for you. Um, Obviously, there are big differences between self-publishing and working with traditional publishers, and you might hear exaggerated versions of it sometimes, and some of it might be on the truth. But from your point of view, what are like the main differences of doing it on your own and then having a big team behind you, kind of doing all the scheduling and all that kind of stuff? How does that work for you?
It's so the biggest, I mean, so the biggest sort of initial difference you'll find is time, because it just takes so much time for anything to happen in traditional publishing. It's like turning a tanker. So from when we signed the deal for Orbit to pick up the Lost War and the then next subsequent three books, I think that was, if I remember rightly, I think that was sort of late 2021. And bear in mind, the Lost War was written and had already been published.
Mhm.
I had written a 200,000 word first draft of the Bitter Crown. Um, so the first two books were kind of there and nearly there. I had to get the Bitter Crown down to, I was told to get the Bitter Crown to more like 150. I got it to about 165, and it went back up to about 174 in edits, because I always end up having to add in edits, not take away.
Mhm.
Um, but so they were both sitting there at really advanced stages at the time when the deal was signed. But we didn't publish The Lost War until I think March of 2023, and The Bitter Crown December 2023. So there's, it wasn't like I needed a lot of time, I needed a lot of writing time. It was simply that that's how long it took
Mhm.
to get it all done, because they've got so many different books they're working on, and um, really not very many staff,
Yeah.
that it just takes a long time. And also, as I understand it, bookshops need bookshops and I think possibly sales agents need final copies, or finalized copies 6 months before launch, in order to sort out ordering and sales and systems and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it just takes forever. It takes a really long time. Um, what you'll find so far, the major benefit I find is a more exposure. Um, you can get into bookshops. You can get into
Mhm.
bookshops in a way that you simply can't as an indie author, unless you're huge, unless you're, Ryan Cahill or Rachel McLean or somebody like that. That, like, other than being as big as them, it's incredibly difficult to get into a bookshop. Not least because it's incredibly difficult, as anybody who has done any self publishing will know. It's incredibly difficult to price your book in a way and offer the kind of discount the bookshops want, where you make anything on it at all.
Yeah.
Um, and they always want it on return, so you one book gets returned and you've blown the profit from another, eight, nine, 10 books.
Yeah.
So it's just, getting books into actual physical bookshops is really hard work. Having said that, the explosion of e-reading and ebooks um, is a big counter to that. And I'm really not convinced that the traditional industry has yet got its head round and has the best approach yet to ebooks.
Mm.
Um, I suspect that still has some evolving to do, I think,
Yeah.
um, and we'll see where that goes in future. But I mean, I think they haven't quite worked out the best way to make use of that. I mean, the best way to get traditionally published books big e-reader audiences or big ebook reader audiences, because they're there. They're clearly there. There are clearly books that sell huge numbers on even just on Kindle Unlimited, but without even talking about actual sales, but even just Kindle Unlimited reads. The potential's there, but I'm not convinced that they've quite got their head around that as a medium in the way that they obviously have paperbacks.
Yeah, because I mean, with self-publishing, there is that entrepreneurialism, isn't there? That is embedded in it, and it is that kind of, we're going to take a risk with this, going to look at the pricing model, look at what
Mm-hmm.
other people are doing. Whereas with traditionally published things, don't quite like taking risks. They don't like risk. It's all about, let's not lose money on this. Let's try to maximize it. So there is that kind of thing where it's like, there's a little bit of reticence, isn't there, sometimes, where, and I'm sure obviously with your experience that you got it and you were
There
doing it
is.
with Lost War, where it's like, well, I was doing this and it was working. Can we not do something like that? And probably the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You give up a lot of control when you go traditional. Having been a self-published author before, you lose that. You lose. I had that 200K first draft of the Bitter Crown as an example, and I did not touch that until I knew if we were going to get a deal or not. Because if we didn't get a deal, I was going to essentially edit that and publish it at that length,
Mm.
because it made no difference to me. In fact, as people will tell you, longer books are good in Kindle Unlimited. As I think I saw in the chat from before this, actually, I was trying to think when I just read that recently. I think it was in the chat.
It's about my book as well.
Well, there you go. Case in point. So longer books are good for Kindle Unlimited because you get paid for page read.
Mm.
So I was going to publish it at that 200K length, but no, with traditional publishers, they have to take into account the print cost, physical print cost, the cost of paper, which at the time, I don't know if it's even vaguely recovered yet, but like post COVID, the cost of paper was astronomical. And so everybody was worried about how much that was going to cost and how, the scale that they would have to work at to make the unit
Mhm.
prices work. So yeah, I was told that had to come down, and that had to get down nearer, as I say, 150. It ended up 175, but you'll notice that the print is quite small.
Yes.
In the
Yeah.
final
Yeah.
books, the print size is
Yeah.
quite small,
Yeah.
because paper costs just became such a massive overhead.
Hmm.
They've always a big overhead to the print industry, obviously, but they became even bigger, and so length matters. Whereas as an indie, when 95% of your sales are ebooks, it doesn't matter. You can write
Right.
as long a book as you want, and the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get more out of KU. So
Right.
um, yeah, there's major swings and roundabouts. There's also, there's this, as you say, there's the risk taking as well. Like if you decide you want to write a particular book, and you think there's an audience for it, and you think you'll bring readers to it, you can just publish it. It's kind of what happened with Carpe Diem. In all honesty, I know I originally went with a very small press, but I subbed that out to agents, and what I kept hearing back was it's good, but there's no real market for comedy fantasy. You know, I got told, I think, quote unquote, I got told, bookshops don't have a comedy fantasy section; they have a Terry Pratchett shelf.
Oh dear.
And it's not inaccurate. I mean, it's not accurate, but it's not inaccurate. It's somewhere in the
Right.
middle there.
Yeah.
I mean, we have seen very successful comedy fantasy books, but I think the only names that for many people come to mind when you say like comedy SFF are Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams. And if you're not one of
Mm.
them, even the likes of, you've got Jasper Ford, Ben Aranovich, Tom Holt, three writers I love who I would say are all under the umbrella of comedy to one extent or another, um, doing really well, selling loads of books, but it's like they don't exist in the minds of, like they haven't made it into the collective mindset of people who make these decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a funny one, isn't it? And obviously, you've seen both sides of it. With Carpet DM, to go back to one that is still available, still self-published. For it in the chat there. You last time we spoke, you said that there was still plans for a sequel for that one, but it was
There are, I yes, it might be. I'm currently writing the fourth and final book in the Eden Saga. The third book's out in August. The fourth book will be out next year. When depends on when I finish it. But it will be out. My intention is I get it in, before summer, and it's out next year. Um, and that will be that finished. And then it might well be the next thing I write, because I did start it. I started the sequel, and I started it right before COVID hit, and then COVID hit, and I just discovered that I couldn't write comedy. I was just too stressed, and well, stressed. Stressed is the thing I was. I was stressed like everybody else was.
yeah,
Um, and so I couldn't get myself into that kind of flippant, silly, light-hearted mindset that I had to be in to write Carpe Diem, and that I had to be in to write the start of the sequel. And so I had to just accept that I had to move away from that and go and write the Bitter Crown instead, which is what I wrote instead at that point.
hmm yeah,
Um, but yeah, I couldn't do light and funny and silly and you know bizarre observations on humanity and life, with dick jokes. I had to go and write something dark and political and you know existential, because it was all
yeah.
that my mind was prepared to focus on.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the two different series that you got. So, because in case people haven't read them or haven't come across them before, what is Carpet Diem? What's it? What in your mind? What is it? What's it about?
I mean, I have regularly described it as Tom Holt with dick jokes, because that kind of is what it is. Um, it's the basic pitch for it is, an Edinburgh hermit discovers that his living room carpet is the deciding factor in a bet between God and Satan. Um, and it's it started out as an idea. That idea right there, that was what was the beginning of it. And then I
Uh-huh.
developed the main character of Simon, and that's a lot of the beginning of the book is about who Simon is and establishing his character really. Um, but I mean, I'd like to. I wrote it, as I say, I wrote it like 25 years ago. Started writing it anyway 25 years ago. And my intention at the time, 25 years ago, was that it was going to be something kind of, challenging, um, maybe what we would now call some unconscious biases. So I intended it to be a somewhat feminist book. I intended it to be addressing, ideas about age and aging. I intended it to poke some fun at human relationships and how everybody's insecurities and the mess that we all kind of are on the inside as opposed to what we see on the outside. All of that was meant to be in there. And now, if I look at it now, I think, God, the world's changed so much in that 25 years that the kind of stuff I was wanting to poke at the walls of is standard. Nowadays it's like, yes, this is what we expect from society, and it probably doesn't come across as a very feminist book these days, because it's so far behind what feminism now is, and some of the actual advances we've made in the last 25 years. So I would call it a, a silly, hopefully witty, slightly bawdy romp, that should make you laugh. I hope.
It made me laugh. I like it a lot. And the British Fantasy Society, I should say, this was before my time, said that if you like Good Omens, then you'll love this book. So there is
That's
that
true.
as well. So if you,
That is true. I was really pleased with that.
yeah,
Yeah, that was back when it was. I was getting some great reviews back when it was self-published. I mean, I had that BFS review. Sci-Fi Now loved it. They gave it 5 stars. Picked up a review in, oh my lord, what's the other magazine we got a review in? Mine's gone blank. It's too late. I'm half asleep already. Um, SFX. That's what it was. Um, so yeah, it was picking up really good reviews. It did really well. The guys at Wild Wolf were like, look, this has been great for us. This has been a good relationship for us. It's brought us in good money. By the time I left them to self-publish it, had been picked up by Tantor for the audiobook as well.
yeah.
So yeah, it did really well. And I do like it as a book. I mean, if I wrote it today, there would be a lot different about it.
Mm.
And there will be a lot different in the sequel, because simply because the world has changed so much, um,
Yeah.
in that sort of 25 years between me starting to write the the Carpe Diem and now and today, um,
Yeah.
that it will be a different. But I will try to bring the same sort of sense of humor and silliness and fun to it, and poke at some other walls instead that aren't already broken down. Although, having said that, the way things are going at the moment, maybe we need to reinforce those walls that we already broke down.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Um, well, I mean, I think as well, like the length of time between it and even like finishing it and then doing the Eden saga and then coming back to it. I mean, your perspective changes as well, doesn't it? So you look at
Oh
things
yeah,
differently and all of that. I mean, and that was is where the Eden saga comes in a little bit because um, just to kind of talk about that a little bit and to let people know what it is. I mean, some of that came from as kind of I don't want to say like run of the mill, but as ordinary and as normal as like being inspired by your D&D sessions
yep.
to all the other things that are in it. And it's got one of like, one of the I think one of the best modern fantasy twists at the end of the first book as well. But I mean the beginnings of it was just basically these are the characters that we use in D&D.
It was three different things. I thought I had ideas for three different books because I had a setting, I had characters, and I had a premise. Not so much a plot, but a premise that I wanted to use. And so my I can't say what the premise is because it'll ruin the end of the book. But the the characters were, yeah, there were these characters that friends and I that my wife and I had played for many years in a role playing campaign, and when we finished that campaign, I wanted to do something with them because I just had become quite attached to those characters and I thought they were cool, and so I used them as the inspiration for like seven of my main characters. And then the other thing was that I wanted to do something based on a fantasy country that was founded on Edinburgh, basically on my hometown. So I wanted to take Edinburgh, turn it into a fantasy country, and then take the sort of etymology of its place names, some of the history, some of the mythology, and build all that in to both the world building and to some extent to the story and the characters as well, so that it's all informed by that. Um, and as I say, I then had this premise, which was like it's like a it's a political metaphor. I'm very into politics, as anybody who's ever been anywhere near me on social media will know. Um, and so it was literally like one day it was that sort of moment of like, wait, they all work together. This is one story. This is how I do this. And that's where I pulled the Lost War together from. And then once I'd done that, it was absolutely screaming at me to write it. Once I had those three things come together, I was desperate to get it down on paper. Um, and that's what I ended up doing. That was the first time I tried to write the sequel to Carpet Diem, and I literally couldn't focus on doing it because my brain was just screaming at me with ideas for this other book. Um, and so I wrote that instead, and it felt like a massive gamble because I'd written this pretty successful, comedy fantasy, and I was going to write something completely different that is a much more serious, um, political metaphor, mystery, dark fantasy, thriller, conspiracy, nothing like it. And it was scary. I have to say, it was. I mean, I was dying to write it, but it was scary. The whole time I was writing it, I was thinking, I have no idea if this is any good or not, because I only have any kind of validation that I can write comedy. I have no idea whether I can write this, whatever this
Mm.
is. Um, and thank God it went down well, and people liked it, and it's been successful. But yeah, that was a scary jump to go. Okay, I've done something successful. Now I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah. I mean, if you had an agent at that point, your agent would probably be him pulling his hair out, like, don't do this. Like, this was
Yeah,
good. Like, this is done
yeah.
well. Don't do something. Um,
And there's an advantage of being indie right there. There's an advantage of being
right.
self-published is that if I'd been with an agent at that point, I've been under contract, I'd have had to write the sequel to something that I
Yes.
wasn't in the right headspace to write because I had something else I desperately wanted to write, and I probably would have been told, "Don't be silly, you can't take your audience with you." But that isn't. I don't want to write the same things forever. I don't want to just write the same thing. I don't want to do the same but different for the rest of my career.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where you get these massive wait times for some of these books where people have been working on them for literally decades. And it's like, it's hard to keep going back to the well, to doing the same but different, even if it's a world that you love and have created. Sometimes you just need to do
Yeah,
something artistically different. Um,
yeah.
for people watching, if you have any questions for Justin, please get them in because we have got just under 10 minutes left in our conversation. So any questions for Justin about his work, his experiences as it's self-published or trad published, please get them in there. His links for the books are in the chat as well. Um, I wanted to kind of. I mean, I'm a big D&D player. I love everything to do with like TTRPGs and what have you. I just wanted to kind of and also I love Edinburgh. There we go. There's the dice. I've got mine here as well in my little thing. Um, and yeah, I love Edinburgh as well. It's my favourite. You may have heard me say it before. It's my favourite city in Scotland, which doesn't go down well with some of my friends who live in Glasgow.
Are you listening,
Um,
Dan?
right. um, um, but I'm really interested with that. We've taken those two aspects of your life, of these things that you enjoy and where you live, and kind of bringing those into something that's fantastical. Because I remember when I first I mean, I think I always wanted to be a writer when I was younger and growing up, and I never quite trusted myself to do it until I was a little bit older. But I was always used to find and I think this is my autistic mind being very, very black and white, where it's like there was that saying, write what you know. And I was like, well, why, how, that doesn't make sense because how then does these things that, these fantastical things happen? But I didn't realize for a long time that it's like, it's not the trappings or everything. It's that you take these small things from your life and you bake them into it. So I was just
Mm.
wondering with those aspects of melding it into something that is so fantastical and everything, does that help with the writing process, and did it help you kind of get really engaged into it, especially when you were writing it during the kind of climate that you were writing that in?
Yeah, I mean, I I think as a writer, it's always beneficial to write what you're excited about, not necessarily what you know. I think because it's just easier to produce something great if you're excited about it. If you're excited about it, that enthusiasm is more likely to come through in what you write and excite readers.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that I think of write what you know. I think to an extent there is something in that. I think it's just broader than that. I mean, writing something, for example, I wrote this epic fantasy mystery conspiracy thriller thing, right? But it's full of politics and religion, which are two topics I'm just interested in. And I'm interested in writing about, and I'm interested in thinking about, and I'm interested in talking about. And because of that, I have a lot to say on those subjects, and therefore, and I can use my characters to show and do and talk about that. I mean, literally, there's a lot of things that are just campfire conversations, having theoretical conversations I've had in my head, or possibly slightly mirroring real life conversations that I've had with other people, musings on existence and everything that you can squeeze in there. And I wanted to do it
Hello,
because I was
boys.
interested in it and I was passionate about it.
I said
So
hello, boys.
so that was that was a big part of it. I think you don't have to write what you know, but if you've got something to say, you've got something from if you've got something human you want to talk about and something real that you want to talk about and get down on the page. I think that's the most important thing. So I think when people say write what you know, I think it's more like write what you know in here, not necessarily up here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and I think it's really, really great advice for anyone that is aspiring to write or is in the process of writing. I've been doing it for quite a long time. We've talked about a lot of that stuff during the panels today about um, what we can bring to things, and on that, I mean, you offer that as well. You do a lot of work with the right advice, which is something you do with a couple of other authors. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, that's right. So last year, Anna Stevens and Steve Aryan and I all happened to be thinking at the same time about offering sort of support services, editorial services for authors, and we thought, well, let's do it together. That makes, we'll pool our resources and we'll promote ourselves together, and that'll be much easier than each of us individually trying to do it. So that's what we did. So we set up therightadvice.co.uk, and the main thing that I tend to do is we all offer mentoring for anybody who's just looking for some support in whatever way. Um, but we offer a variety of different things. So Anna does a lot of full editing packages. I'm currently doing full editing packages, but the main thing I've really been doing is a thing I call an example edit, where I take one chapter and basically tear it apart and show you all the ways in which I might change it, or tweak it to improve it. um, and that's been quite popular. People have enjoyed that, and felt that they benefited from it. Steve also does a thing where he does he'll help you with a pitch. I can't remember what the actual service is called. I want to say pitch query package assessment. There you go. It's in there somewhere. Query package assessment, where he uses his experience not only of querying himself, but also marketing experience to help put query packages together. So yeah, without turning this into a massive sales pitch, the three of us between us are offering kind of a range of stuff, support for authors, and it's been really good. It's been interesting actually, because what I've learned is that there are so many things that I do on instinct. I mean, I've been writing and editing professionally now for over 2 decades. It must be like 25 years since I first started getting paid to write things. Um, and there's so many things I do automatically, or I do on instinct, that I don't consciously think about. But then when I'm going through other people's work and sort of going, oh, I would do this or tweak that, or and I need to explain it to them, well, why have I done that? And it's like,
Mm.
oh, well, okay, I need to think this through. I've done that because this, or I've done that because that, and having to add those notes, and it's made me more aware of what I do, but I just do it without consciously thinking about it, because it's become second nature to me now.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny with that where you are kind of unpacking the story for someone, the structure of the story, and kind of really examining it. Because I find that being the main thing of editing people's work is like you have arcs and you have all this kind of stuff, but it's the actual structure of how a story is working, and then
Mm.
you know it. You can. I see it with like my son sometimes. I'll watch something with my son, and he'll be like, "That person's going to be the bad guy, aren't they?" And I'm like, "Well, why do you
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
is?"
yeah.
And it's like you recognize this thing in it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's harder to notice that in your own work, but when you sit down with someone else, it's just like, yeah, I can see it. I can see it there, and that's what's great to go with, like writing or mentorship, especially if you're looking to make that jump to self-publishing or maybe even going to query, and just having that experience of someone going, yeah, let's have a look at it this way. Would you have ever liked to have been, as before we wrap up, would you have ever liked to have been mentored when you were first starting out? Who would you would like to have been your mentor?
Ooh. Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I hmm. See, I had the misfortune, or I have had, I suppose, the misfortune that I used to always quote three particular writers as the kind of writers that I aspired to write like, and who inspired me to write. Um, and only one of them has not completely disgraced themselves since then. So they were Joss Whedon, Neil Gaiman, and Aaron Sorkin, and I've only got Aaron Sorkin left. So I'm just
Dear.
praying he doesn't turn out to be a terrible human being as well.
Yes,
Um,
let's hope so.
so yeah, I mean, let's stick with the one who hasn't come out to be a terrible person. I think Aaron Sorkin. I think Aaron Sorkin's dialogue is absolutely second to none. A lot of this is the thing, like with writers, I don't really have a favorite writer, but if you ask me about elements of things, I can tell you writers that I really admire for that. Like I adore Joe Abercrombie, and
Mm.
I'm really excited that I'm getting to interview him in May for
You
the
are,
Devil's Rejected
yes. I
thing,
saw
and
that. Yeah, yeah.
it's just great. Um,
Mm.
but I also know that one of the things I love most about his writing is that his character work is amazing. His character work is just incredible. Whereas somebody like Gareth Hanrahan's world building is incredible. He does an amazing job of world building, and some of the creatures he comes up with are just
Mm.
like it's one of those things where you read something, you think, I don't think in a million years I would ever have thought of that. I don't think I would ever have imagined that as a thing if you'd given me as long as I wanted. It just wouldn't have happened. Gareth just has an amazing imagination. So I know what I like particularly about other authors. Um, But yeah, I think Aaron Sorkin, The West Wing is one of my favorite things that's ever been on television. I absolutely love it. I love The Newsroom too. I don't think he's ever done anything that I didn't adore. So I guess it would probably be Aaron Sorkin. Yeah,
There we go. Excellent stuff. Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It was talk to you all day, as we often do. But we rarely record it. Thanks so much for coming on and talking to us. Where can everyone find you if you want to look up more about your work and see what you've got coming up?
you can go to my website, which I update terribly irregularly, which is just justinleeanderson.com. I'm most commonly these days on Blue Sky, also as justinleeanderson.com. But I also have, I mean, I have a Twitter page. I have well, I don't have a Twitter page. I've left that now. I have a Facebook page, is what I meant to say. I'm on Instagram. I'm even on TikTok, although I haven't done an awful lot with it, but I am there. And yeah, you know, books 1 and 2 of the Eden Saga are out. Book 3 is coming out in August. So look out for that launch news then.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to speak to us at Indie Fantasy Convention. Really excited to see the next book in the Eden Saga and to see you next time I see you, whenever that will be.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.